Hello, this is Janet Show, and we are back for another episode of the Libertarian Uncensored podcast, going over all the posts on the Libertarian Uncensored subreddit. Let's get right into it. So first we have Weeks Away, that was posted by Donald Key, and that's cross-post from the That's Insane subreddit, and that's a post that says Iran has been weeks away from nuclear weapons since at least 1995, and that's a post, and that was a tweet from The Daily Show, it looks like, and it's Benjamin Netanyahu saying Iran's been weeks away from nuclear weapons pretty much since he first took office in 1996, well, even before that, I guess, it says 1995, but yeah, ultimately, it's just, I think, fear-mongering on the most part. Even if Iran does get nukes, they probably won't ever actually use them, just like Pakistan does. People are saying, oh, an Islamist country can't have nukes. Well, neighboring Pakistan's had nukes for quite a while already, and they don't really ever use them, even though they're next to a country they hate in India. So, it's just kind of fear-mongering, I think. So every day is the world ending. Eventually you gotta call Chicken Little out when he says the sky is falling every single day. If you want to believe the world is collapsing, that's fine. But, eventually, you realize that nothing ever really seems to happen, despite what social media sensationalism might have you think. And just media sensationalism in general, I would say. Then we have Lawrence O'Donnell calls for Mike Lee staff resignations over Minnesota suspect post from thehill.com, posted by Ninja Lover, and they shared a quote from the article. Mike Lee purports to be a man of great religiosity, but he's obviously a man of great morality or great decency, and his staff has decided tonight what to do about the disgrace he has handed them. And, yeah, personally, if you want to call for some staff resignations over anything, like, if you think, the staff shared incorrect information about, how a lot of people thought the suspect was initially more of a leftoid since he was appointed by Tim Walz to a position, but apparently he's more of a religious rightoid, they say. So, the Mike Lee says, his staff said on his account, he was a leftoid and it was all left-wing terrorism. And if they want to say that, they should be able to. And if you want to call for him to resign because you don't think that's true, that's fine. But you shouldn't force anyone to resign. Live in the libertarian position is, if Mike Lee wants to fire his staff for whatever reason, that's on him. You shouldn't you can't tell him who he can and can't fire. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Then we have how the transgender rights movement bet on the Supreme Court and lost, the case that could set the movement back a generation, posted by Lemon Limelight, and they said, the New York Times Magazine ran a very thorough story how the transgender rights movement bet on the Supreme Court and lost on the Supreme Court case, which upheld a state ban on certain gender-affirming care for minors. The subheading calls it Inside Story of the case that could set the movement back a generation. A companion story, What to Know About the Transgender Rights Movement, Supreme Court Gamble, shares 6 takeaways from the landmark case built on flawed politics and uncertain science. One, some have said LGBTQ activists and legal experts have long expected a dark defeat in Scrimeti. Many experts considered the case an extraordinary risk, and only was there little chance that the conservative-dominated court would expand heightened constitutional protections on trans people. A defeat in Scrimeti could open the door to other losses. 2, underlying Scrimeti was the broader cultural battle over how to understand and describe human identity. LGBTQ activists came to believe that gender identity should support older understandings of physical sex. The self-identified gender, not your physical body, should determine what appears on your driver's license, what bathrooms you can access, what sports teams you can play on. Scrimeti marked a departure from the LGBTQ movement's winning political playbook. The movement pursued incremental legal and regulatory wins that ultimately sparked deep social change. Post Scrimeti, the movement bet its future on a far more fraught question, whether children have a constitutional right to medical treatments that allow them to live and appear as a different sex. Just as the LGBTQ movement dug in on pediatric gender medicine, several European countries began moving away. Some of the current central medical claims regarding the legal case for pediatric gender treatments that decades of thorough study had found them to be safe and effective began to unravel amid growing scrutiny by other doctors and experts. Studies known as systematic reviews raised doubt about whether gender-affirming treatments delivered the health benefits to young people that gender clinicians and LGBTQ advocates were claiming in court. Dueling cases over pediatric gender care raised questions about medical standards at the heart of the arguments of Scrimeti. In a separate lawsuit against a similar ban, Alabama's lawyers argued that the document showed that WPATH had drafted its guidelines in part to aid lawyers and activists working to expand access to transition care, and were aware that the care they were strongly endorsing for adolescents was backed by limited scientific evidence. Democrats and their LGBTQ allies misread the Supreme Court. Chase Strangio and other left-leaning policy and legal officials hoped to advance a revolution in trans rights that eluded them in Congress and many state legislatures. The court did not rule directly on whether Bostock, which meant an important civil right for gay and trans people, could be applied to other statutes of the Constitution, but found that Tennessee's ban would survive Bostock's legal logic. And yeah, I would agree with all that. Just because the LGBTQ plus movement has gotten too big for its britches too quickly, I would say. They think they're entitled to everything. And yeah, personally, if you think minors can consent to all the gender-affirming care, I personally don't think the kids can consent to non-life-saving medicine, and the Supreme Court apparently agrees with that. But ultimately, I think that the progressive left has gone too far in this movement, and I'm glad that there's some backlash to it. Libertarian perspectives don't tell me what to do, but just because I don't think I should tell you what to do doesn't mean that I think you're right. It's like the progressives always say, it's just healthcare, but then lobotomies were just healthcare at one point as well, and I would have been against those as well. So that's important to remember as well, and that's very much how I see this case. Then we have Supreme Court upholds curbs on care for transgender minors from news.bloomberglaw.com, posted by Dr. 7. And yeah, as I said earlier, I personally think, if people want to justify giving their children gender-affirming care, or whatever's marketed as gender-affirming care, I think they should be able to. People will justify whatever they want feel like. With that being said, I definitely personally don't think kids can consent to that, so I personally, as I said, would agree with the Supreme Court here. Then we have, maybe some of it, if you want to dress your kid as a different gender, I think kids can dress themselves however they want to, but I don't think they should be getting hormones or top and bottom surgery. And yeah. Then we have Robert John May III, U.S. Representative from South Carolina, was arrested this week on 10 counts of child pornography charges from Monday Image 13, and that's a cross post from the Age Like Milk subreddit. May told the House in January 2024 regarding transgender issues in children, we as legislators have an obligation to insert that our children and children have no harm done to them. And yeah, of course, Reddit only cares because Robert John May is a Republican rather than a Democrat. If he had a Democrat, this would be swept under the rug or downvoted. But since he's a member of the out group rather than the in group, it just confirms their worldview, and it'll be upvoted, and everyone will circle themselves over it. Then we have 2 weeks, and that's posted by Donkey, and that's a crossword from the Stock Bet subreddit. Trump gave Iran 2 weeks. Why does that sound familiar? And yeah, it's always seemed like when it comes to politicians these days, it's always 2 weeks. It was 2 weeks to flatten the curve for COVID. Then Vladimir Putin said Ukraine would be a 2-week military operation for Russia. And now Trump's saying Iran needs 2 weeks. Eventually you realize 2 weeks is just how they kick the can down the road forever. And yeah, that's my thoughts there. Then we have Magic Tree House offer Mary Pope Osborne, children's poet Shel Silverstein, and Calvin Hobbes cartoonist Bill Watterson have joined Judy Blume, Sarah J. Maas, Eric Carle, and Carter Vonnegut on a mind-boggling list of hundreds of books purged from some Tennessee school libraries from Penn.org, posted by Ref Libman. And yeah, personally, I don't really think they should be banning. It's not really banning books if you're removed from public libraries. But with that being said, whenever it's for the progressives, it's banning books, but if I bet they removed Mein Kampf, or Turner Diaries, or recently in upstate New York, they removed the Tuttle Twins. That's a libertarian-leaning book series for kids, and no one they wouldn't care. They'd say that's justified. But when they remove their books, suddenly it's the worst thing ever. So, I personally think you should try and have as many books as possible. But if the library board does have a problem with any of them, and they want to remove them, they should be able to. Ultimately, I think it's just the problem of having state-run libraries in the first place. Libraries should arguably be private rather than public. And that's why I think we should get rid of public libraries, since, there's only a finite amount removed from the shelves, and if the state ever has to remove books, you can consider that as state censorship. And yeah, that's personally why I think we should just get rid of public libraries entirely. I think that would be the libertarian position here. Then we have, with 103 days to go, Ice Barbie has already blown through her budget, triggering the Anti-Deficiency Act, and that's posted by CH4Locks. And that's a cross post from the Advice Animals subreddit, and that's the guy from South Park saying ICE has an $8 billion yearly budget, and it's gone. And yeah, just because people might say they're fiscally conservative doesn't mean they actually are. The Republican Party markets itself as fiscally conservative, but they're just spent like there's no tomorrow, like the Democrats. And yeah, it just goes to show you that, both parties will screw you over in their own ways, but a lot of the times they'll overlap with each other as well, like when it comes to spending like there's no tomorrow. And we have Judge orders Columbia student Mahmoud Khalil released on bail from BBC.com, posted by Flimsy Al 556 and that's from that's not a cross post. You know, most of these suburbs posts in suburbs these days are cross posts. But yeah, I would agree with that. You know, personally, I don't. You can disagree with Khalil's rhetoric about Palestine, Israel, and all that, but that doesn't mean he should be censored and thrown in detention. You know, the libertarian perspective is support freedom of speech, even if you know Khalil's not a citizen, and just a Greenard quote over. You need to support freedom of speech, even if you might disagree with it. Next, we have ice fishing, and that's posted from Mundane Image 13, and that looks like a bunch of Reddit protesters hanging donuts on a stick in front of ICE agents. And yeah, you know, personally, I wouldn't taunt government agents like that. They might get aggressive against you, and you know, they have the legal monopoly on these force justified whatever they want to, and oftentimes there's no way you can hold them accountable. But yeah, if average Redditor wants to hold a donut on a stick up to them and say, "Hey, I'm fighting, I'm Nazis here," you know, they should if they want to justify doing that, I guess. Yeah, I personally wouldn't, but you know, just don't be surprised if it ends up being a fuck around find out for you. And I think we're gonna wrap it up there. I'll see you guys in the next episode. Bye.